Okay, guys, it's Mr. Cooney here. Glad you're watching, and this is my review of Mice and Men, part one, okay, which is about the first 17 pages or so of the novel. I'm going to talk about the plot and the themes a little bit, just to start off in general, just to kind of get you centered, and then I'll kind of talk my way through those 5 questions and maybe touch base about some things you might have touched on in the prompt. So in general, the plot, in a lot of ways, you see George's speech kind of foreshadow the plot of the rest of the book. Okay, so seeing George and Lenny, they're going to arrive at the ranch. They're going to meet just the kind of lonely working men that George, describes here in this section, and kind of telling how they're different, and the types of guys that you heard John Steinbeck and people that knew him and talk about his books write about in that video that we watched, right? So unlike these solitary men, both George and Lenny have somebody to talk about that quote unquote gives a damn, right? Like George says, a great deal of the book's interactions and conflicts come from George's efforts to protect Lenny and from Lenny's reliance on George. But this first chapter kind of establishes the goal of the main characters here, right? They want to have a house of their own. They want to have some land and some animals. They talk about some rabbits, right? Much of the suspense is going to derive from the question of whether or not they'll achieve this dream. And that goes back to the American dream, right? Is it an achievable thing? Is it realistic? Is it a myth? Was it any of those things or not to the people who were alive during the time that the story set in the 20s? Excuse me, the 30s. Okay, so themes. Many of them are going to kind of appear in these key passages. Um, Loneliness, solitude, which means doing things by yourself, not necessarily wanting to. Poverty, work, human connection, like we said, the American dream, dreams in general. This chapter is called Dreams and Aspirations, right? George's speech is going to describe ranch laborers as quote unquote like the loneliest guys in the world. And the other chapters are going to show that loneliness in more detail when it's going to reveal a group of people who live with each other, but still kind of while living in solitude. You'll see. Next chapter is also kind of reveal the backbreaking work that they actually do, the physical work that they do, and how much and how little they get for it during this time, the Depression. Throughout the book, Steinbeck will also kind of focus on the joy and hardship of human connection and difficult circumstances, what it does to people, makes people afraid of each other. We'll see an early glimpse of that shared joy in Lenny and George's interaction here. But finally, we see they're kind of sustained by a dream that's similar to the traditional white picket fence of the American dream, and that people either can achieve or can't, depending on their circumstances, the setting, the time and place in which they live around the country, and things like that. Okay, going down to the think questions. The first one was, what does George say makes Lenny and him different from other ranch laborers, and support your answer with evidence from the text. So kind of touched on that before, talking about the plot. So according to George, other ranch laborers are alone without any friends or family. They spend all their money on temporary pleasures, right? Which can be kind of vice-like things. You're gonna hear talk about, liquor and prostitutes and things like that, without having anything to look forward to, and just kind of getting by on stuff that isn't gonna satisfy them in the long run. So Lenny and George, on the other hand, they have each other, plus this dream of living in a house of their own one day. And I've kind of got these passages selected here that you may or may not have also kind of gotten. Right here, George's voice became deeper. He repeated his words rhythmically as though he'd said them many times before. Guys like us that work on ranches are the loneliest guys in the world. They got no family. They don't belong no place. They come to a ranch and work up a stake, and they go into town, they blow their stake, and the first thing you know, they're pounding their tail on some other ranch. They got nothing to look ahead to. And this is the thing that you could tell that Lenny is always trying to get George to recite, like kind of recite their dream or dramatize it, right? And George keeps telling them, "Oh, you know it, right?" But Lenny doesn't, because if you can't tell, Lenny's kind of mentally disabled, probably learning disabled, and he doesn't retain a lot of stuff, right? With us, it ain't like that. We got a future. We got somebody to talk to us that gives a damn about us. We don't have to sit in a bar and blowing our money just because we got no place else to go. If them other guys gets in jail, they can rot for all anybody gives a damn, but not us. Notice how he makes the dialogue, Steinbeck makes the dialogue really colloquial, right? There's going to be some cussing in there, some slang, some of which will be familiar, some won't. And then Lenny says, but not us, right? He gets so excited. Why? Because I got you to look after me and you got me to look after you. Go on now, George. And then he keeps talking about it, right? So it's kind of touching, right? Because Lenny, you can tell he's this really innocent, kind of gentle giant. But you can also tell from some of the other things that he's gotten himself into trouble by maybe not being able to control, his own size and strength if he gets a little emotional. So there's kind of hints of that. Okay, the second question is, when they're introduced, George and Lenny are described as opposites. Besides their physical differences, what are some of the other ways in which they're opposites? And then use evidence from the text to support your answer. And you might have noticed that before they're even introduced at all, or even shown in the first scene. I'll kind of go to the beginning here. There's kind of this really naturalistic description of the setting, and it's just absolute natural state. All right, can I see this here? And it just kind of gives you this idea of like, humans being animals out there trying to survive, just like the rest of these animals that we see before they finally come out. We start to see this dialogue between them. So anyway, George and Lenny are described as opposites, and besides their physical differences, this is your question number 2, what are some other ways in which they are opposites? Use evidence from the text to support your answer. Oh, we could look at this here. Lenny dabbled his big paw in the water, wiggled his fingers so the water rose in big splashes. Rings widened across the pool to the other side and came back again. Lenny watched them go. Look, George, look what I've done. Then George knelt beside the pool and drank from his hand with big scoops. Tastes all right, he admitted. Don't you really seem to be running, though? You ought to never drink water when I ain't running late, Lenny. You got to get a gutter after you're thirsty. He threw a scoop of water in his face and rubbed it about his hand, under his chin, the back of his neck. George stared morosely at the water, kind of all those passages there. George seems to be a leader, right? He's always giving Lenny advice. Well, Lenny's content to be, his follower at least, right? He literally follows George as they walk into the woods. He imitates George's posture at one point in the first chapter. George seems to be more kind of quick-witted, right? And maybe kind of cynical, if you know that word, which means just kind of expecting bad things to happen, while Lenny's kind of slow-witted and innocent. Example of this is when the way they each treat the river water, like I was just reading there, right? Lenny drinks it happily without any hesitation because he's innocent, doesn't expect anything bad to happen. And George worries that the stagnant water can make him sick. Okay, number 3, what was the big bad thing that Lenny did in Weed that got George and him expelled from the town? Now, we don't get the full picture here, but George almost kind of like recites it like it's happening now or like it's hypothetical, but you can tell, it's actually a real story. And it has to do with why they are going to another place and maybe even are kind of, let's say, on the lam from something or on the run, make sure their past doesn't catch up with them. So what it basically is he petted, quote unquote, a girl's dress. Now that sounds kind of weird to us, right? And if you're someone who petted a girl's dress and didn't stop exactly when she wanted to, then something that would be a bad scene, right? But when the girl jerked back, as it says, he held onto the dress too tightly until she screamed. So he scared this girl. And in all seriousness, do we think, based on Lenny's description, his characterization so far, that he's someone who was really trying to hurt this girl? Probably not. That's just not how he's being depicted, right? So here's the passage. Just wanted to feel that girl's dress, just wanted to pet it like it was a mouse. And you see in this passage also how he keeps getting the mice and he wants to pet them, but then he accidentally kills them because, again, he can't control his own strength. It's cute, but it's kind of sad. How the hell did she know you just wanted to feel her dress? Okay, again, this is George making his way through recounting the story with Lenny again. She jerks back and you hold on to it like it was a mouse. She yells, we got to go hide and get irrigation ditch all day with guys looking for us. So we got to sneak out in the dark and get out of the country all the time, something like that. All the time. See, he's really frustrated, right? I wish I could put you in a cage, live with a million mice and let you have fun. And then his anger left him suddenly. He looked across the fire at Lenny's anguished face and he looks ashamedly at the flames. So he gets mad and frustrated because it's hard to take care of Lenny, right? But then a little bit later, when Lenny talks about going off to live in a cave, which is, really sad for the thing for him to say, then George feels really bad and he apologizes and they keep talking about their dreams, right? Okay, on to 4. Why does George throw Lenny's dead mouse into the bush? Why does he feel so strongly about it? Has some evidence there. So, well, he takes it away because it's dead, right? He realizes that George has it in his pocket. And so it's, unfit for him to play with because, it's dirty, right? It's a dead animal. The strength of his feelings kind of seem to stem from his frustration with Lenny's ways and how it gets tiring to look after him, right? It's like taking care of a small child, right? But he's a huge man. He wishes Lenny were different and he could fit in, and his unusual behavior is kind of a constant reminder how deeply George's life is impacted by Lenny's ways, right? And he sounds kind of cruel with the way that he says that out loud in front of Lenny, and then he takes it back and he apologizes et cetera, et cetera. Do you think I have a passage from this somewhere? Let's see. Yep, here we go. You can remember this place, can't you? The ranch is about a quarter mile up the river. Just follow the river. And he says, sure, I can remember this. Didn't remember? I wasn't going to say a word. Of course you did, Lenny. If you just happen to get in trouble like you always done, I want you to come right here, hide in the brush. So he keeps having to do, he's got to think ahead about this, right? So that's, maybe that's a little foreshadowing there. You want to remember that that Lenny is supposed to remember that George has said that if we get in trouble again, that if you get in trouble again, then you come right back here. Make sure you remember where that is. Got to be a reason we're being told that, right? Okay, last question was number 5. George spends much of the first chapter irritated with Lenny and complaining about how much easier his life would be without him. How does George show his affection, nevertheless, for Lenny? So what he does is he suggests that he'll run away, leave George alone, go to a cave, like I said before. And then George realizes he's been unkind to him, right? He says he was just fooling around. And, it's a little bit of both. He promises to give Lenny a puppy and then soothes him by repeating the story about their hopes and dreams, right? He gets you to a passage of that here. I'd find things, George, if I went to that cave, right? I'd lay out in the sun, nobody'd hurt me, and if I found a mouse, I could keep it, nobody'd take it away from me. And then George says, I've been mean, ain't I? And he feels bad. Lenny says, if you don't want me, I can go off in the hills and find a cave. And he says, no, I was just fooling. I want you to stay with me. Trouble with mice is you always kill them. I'll tell you what I'll do, Lenny. First chance, I'll give you a pup. Maybe you wouldn't kill it. Maybe that'd be better than mice and you could pet it harder. So Lenny feels bad. George feels bad. Then they kind of go through this recitation of their dream like we already looked at. And eventually they're going to head off to this place where they're hopefully going to get a work, going to have some work. And it starts off with the bunkhouse was a long rectangular building, and it's going to describe this new place where they are. Okay, we did have one other thing on the study guide, which was the prompt at the end. And it said, as the two main characters are introduced at the beginning of this chapter, it quickly becomes clear that Lenny's accepted George's authority. Describe their relationship in detail using examples from the text. What do each of them offer the other, if anything? Why is George in charge? How does the author indicate the nature of their relationship? Well, it's kind of covered by all the stuff we talked about, right? I mean, obviously George is in charge because he's smarter, right? But the advantage that Lenny gives him is with his size and strength, that he can probably work really well, right? In fact, George can probably tell people where he's going to get work, that Lenny can lift a lot of stuff because it's about, it's about processing stuff on farms, lifting hay bales and moving stuff around and stuff like that. So we'll see how that goes with where they're going. But there's this interplay of George getting frustrated, Lenny getting sad, George feeling sorry, Lenny not wanting to bother him again. It's kind of this back and forth, but you can tell that they do care about each other, right? So we may feel ourselves kind of rooting for them, to achieve this dream, right? Does it feel like a story that has the mood and with the subject area and the setting and who George Steinbeck was and what he was like, that they'll achieve that? I'll just kind of leave you with that question. Okay, so finish this up. Thank you very much for watching and keeping up. Keep reading this week and get part 2 done by the deadline that is listed. And I'll see you in live session soon.